Hello, welcome back to the Autistic Tidbits and Tangent podcast. I'm your host, Kara Dymond. I'm an autistic teacher and university lecturer from Toronto, Canada. And with me is my co-host.
Hi, my name is Bruce Petherick. I am an autistic person. My day job is I'm the autistic advocate at Autism Canada. And my question for the day is, every time we start this podcast, Kara says, welcome back. And I always think, where do we go? Because you and I are in the same place. Have we actually gone anywhere?
Good existential question.
Although I'm wearing different clothes today. So
Yeah, so am I. But it did make me think of that when a tree falls in the forest. Can anyone hear it?
I love that philosophical conundrum because the answer is that it makes sound. It does make sound. It does. There's no question about it. But whether sound exists without human perception is the interesting more part of that question, rather than does it make a sound? It's like there's no sound in space. There actually is, because space is not a total vacuum.
Yeah.
But whether we could hear it, because it's so low frequency or extremely high frequency, and the what's called sound pressure level, how loud the force of the waves hitting the object is so low. It is an interesting question whether there's sound in space.
Well, yeah, and really, everything comes down to perception, including the topic that we are covering today to some degree. We are talking about shutdowns, burnout, meltdowns, maybe a few other things related to those experiences. So stick with us.
Welcome to Autistic Tidbits and Tangents.
Candid conversations between autistic off-hour professionals.
Cool.
Trigger warnings for this episode include a very frank discussion about burnout, inertia, meltdowns and shutdowns, and reactions of society reflecting their lack of understanding towards these concepts. There are brief mentions of suicidal ideation, trauma, sexual assault, gaslighting, authority figures, and blood. I was going to say, did you like my segue there? I was like, perception, let's bring that. But everything is about perception. I think even shutdowns are such an internal experience. People around us don't know necessarily what we're going through. Even meltdowns, so often children are labeled with, an assumption that they are being spoiled, they're being manipulative. That perception matters, because how the outsider perceives us in our most challenging moments, which are challenging for us too, not just the people around, impacts how they treat us, which impacts how quickly or not so quickly we recover.
And I kind of don't want to minimize what you've just said. The immediate thought I had was, it's like saying everything is political, and that can be a blasé statement, but in fact, everything is political too. And it's like, yeah, that's a nice framing. Just to share with our millions of listeners and viewers and people listening on Mars, because I'm sure these radio waves are going off into the ionosphere and transmitted. Last Sunday, I was struggling to an extent that I haven't struggled with for quite a long time, and I was quite close to a burnout. I've had a couple of major burnouts in my life that I've known about from past tense. But this one was, I knew something was happening, and I was trying really hard to moderate the effects. And fortunately, my moderation worked. And like a couple of days later, I was feeling okay. But for the first time, I was really conscious of what was going on. And I wanted to share that. And so that's why the topic of this week's podcast is about this. And it's going to be a very raw personal journey for me. And I've already asked Kara, and she's also going to share how she feels. Does that sort of sound like a nice framing for today?
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does.
Now, like, what do you think contributed to you being more aware of what was going on this time around, this experience?
Why don't you start with an easy question? That is really super interesting. And to be honest, I'm not sure I can fully answer the question. What I can say is that I was cognitively aware of what was going on-ish. So you and I are reading the same book for interesting reasons. Yeah. So actually, do you want to explain the brain, the tri-brain theory?
Oh, so first let me tell you what the book is. It's called Reframed Self-Reg for a Just Society by Stuart Shanker. And you know what, to be honest, I paid less attention to the triune brain as a theory, and more I was trying to understand the concept of like limbic breaking. But he talks about there being sort of 3 brain states, 2 of which work together. So one is blue brain, which is when you are you have the activation in your prefrontal cortex. You're able to think logically, rationally. You're in a state that's a relative calm that supports those cognitive abilities. Red brain is activation of your limbic system, which has implications both for memory and for anxiety. So you sort of have that rush of adrenaline and cortisol, and less activation and very little activation in the front part, the executive functioning part of your brain. And then there's brown brain, which is sort of the meltdown mode, where there is no rational thought, complete loss of control. And yeah, like that's sort of the meltdown mode. How did I do, Bruce?
I think that's great, and there's a parallel description of it being reptilian, limbic, and prefrontal, and that Kara's described it. You just sorry, I'm assuming there's people. You described it perfectly. So here's my idea. I mean, and very influenced because we've been reading that book this week. I was cognitively aware. I was cognitively processing things. So I was aware, things were wrong, something was wrong. And I was cognitively aware something was wrong, not parasympathetic. In other words, it wasn't my body sending me signals going, something's wrong. My brain my active brain was going, there's something wrong because, and I'll explain what was happening for me then. Sensory input was screwy. So definitely that limbic processing was not happening efficiently. And the cognitive brain was going, hey, dude, there's something not going on right, and wasn't getting enough messages. And I think both brains were blocking, really fighting to stop the reptilian coming in.
Yes.
Which of course was like, opening a little
almost there.
in the curtain. but it was. Now I can think about what happened. It was really super interesting of what things I was aware of and what things I was completely unaware of. And relationships at the house were terrible. Like people knew I was struggling, but I was so I was struggling with speech. And it was described to me what was happening, and I thought, it sounds like what was happening is I was cognitively thinking about how to speak. So it was like trying to control all the facial muscles, the throat muscles, diaphragm, all the like physical aspects, as well as putting the cognitive aspects of language together. But it was very, very slow. But my prefrontal cortex was knowing, dude, you're speaking too quick, too slowly, and there's these thousands of thoughts that still need to come out. So the actual, what was the reason I could understand? I could be aware. I'm not sure, other than maybe that circumstance, the cognitive aspect, that I wasn't losing what executive function I had, because I still struggle with executive function. But funnily enough, I also wonder if I had my advocate's hat on. It was like, I'm in an experiment now. I need to remember what's going on. Now that's a strange thing to say, but I wouldn't put it past my non-conscious brain to do that. I don't think it is.
That's not strange at all. I think you and I are both in roles that cause us to be more self-reflective in a lot of ways, as we think about our experiences, as we think about autistic experiences in general. And I think that makes us curious. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all that part of what helped you to sort of keep one foot in the door of blue brain, even though the other foot was straddling red brain and trying to toe over into brown brain, that sort of the impartial observer distance, almost like seeing yourself from the outside, helped you.
What an interesting observation. I often talk to people about the autistic experience, and I've said before, most of the people I interact with on a day-to-day basis as part of my job are adults. I'm either working with, giving a presentation, working with governments or whatever, but I tend to work with adult autistics. And one of the things I talk about is that one of the skills we have is that we are eternal outsiders. We are internal others in a critical sense. And if we're aware of it, it allows us to view problems really quickly in organizations and social situations. And in fact, a lot of problem solving that's not mathematical, like concrete problem solving. I think that's one of an autistic tendency that is not celebrated enough, but it's because we're so excluded. It's so easy for us to see what the structures are and what the holes are.
And we are so often the whistleblowers, the canaries in the coal mine about things, some often to our detriment, but definitely, I think because many of us act with the integrity of our convictions, I certainly have never lamented that, like if there were consequences in my own life, if I felt it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I certain parallel situation. I talk about a common situation in my past life when I was a teacher, except I wasn't a registered teacher, just to make that clear, and what that meant about what I could do in a classroom. And I know always, like very often in job interviews in a personal situation like mine, you're asked if there was a fight happening, what do you do? Now, the correct answer is somebody who's not a certified teacher cannot interfere and needs to get another teacher. Now, I'm going to say, no, I am going to stop. I'm going to make the place safe first, because that is the correct thing to do. Now, if I lose my job because of it, that's silly, but I'm 100% okay. Have I broken the rules after the fact? Yes, I have, and I sort of understand why. But in that situation, no, I've got to do the correct thing, because you're talking about somebody's safety, and oh my, imagine being a teacher and actually caring that much about your students and their well-being. And so that's one, again, being an outsider. It's like, okay, that structure of thing is kind of wrong, yet I do actually understand the logic of it. But in the moment, I'm going to disobey that rule because there's a higher rule that should be followed. And I think the autistic response is, I'm also not going to complain about that. I recognize I've broken a rule because of a whatever choice, and I'm completely comfortable. Well, I'm comfortable with it. It's still, I'm not completely comfortable with it. Anyway, but that's an interesting observation about us still being this eternal outsider, even when something's happening to ourselves.
I mean, it served me well as a teacher. I think more teachers could certainly cultivate a little bit of like rational detachment, because it helps you to be more deliberate in your responses, especially your responses to children who are potentially dysregulated, and yourself, because if you are dysregulated, there's no way your class is not going to be dysregulated. You have to be able to recognize and circumvent your own moving from blue brain to red or brown brain as an adult in that sort of situation.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for that observation. That actually is, I've been struggling with how much of a researcher I was about my own behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to articulate that you and I are, I was going to say pretty well read, but I have to say, quite honestly, we're very well read in autistic studies and the general, autistic experience. But I have not read an internal view of a meltdown, shutdown, or a breakdown. Mm-hmm. And do you sorry, I'm not too sure if I asked you that question specifically. Have you heard anybody describing
those
in the same way?
In the same way. I mean, I've heard people describe their experiences on Twitter. I beta read Maja's book, Maja Toudal's upcoming book, Energy Accounting, which does talk a little bit about chronic stress and burnout. But the study we're going to talk about for Thing of the Day does have some operational definitions. Had I seen operational definitions before? Not really. I would say it's more talking conversationally or on Twitter or other autistic spaces where you sort of see what is the difference between shutdown, meltdown, burnout. And the article had another one, Inertia, as well, which I have also talked about, especially with students who have described something like that. Should we talk about our description?
Well, I was going to say, should we start with that? So.
Sorry, I feel like I'm a hair.
We're so we're well prepared for today. Would you like to start, or would you like me to start?
I'd like you to start. Thank you for the option.
Okay, so in the article we're going to reference, and there's so many really good things about this article, and so many interesting hypotheses. They use BISM?
BIMS. Burnout, inertia, meltdowns, shutdown.
Okay, so here's how I define those things, and it's like there's two scales. The easy one is meltdown and shutdown, and this is what people see as a temper tantrum, or as a child being manipulative in the store. This is the public face, because the other two are very, very not public at all. So I worked this out myself, but it's actually used quite often. The meltdown and the shutdown are similar responses, and almost all of these responses are to sensory input, and we're going to just say that over and over and over and over again. A shutdown is an internal response. A meltdown is an external outward one. So in other words, the meltdown is where things are becoming so overwhelming that an autistic person going through this is maybe noisy, maybe screaming, maybe flinging their arms out, because what you're trying to do is your body is actually trying to push all the bad stuff away, and making it very apparent that there are some problems. And that's, people rolling around on the floor, yelling, people, when you see an autistic person strike out at somebody for no reason, almost all the time, this is a meltdown, and it's an external expression of an internal process. The shutdown is where we lose the ability to externally communicate.
Yeah.
Going into fetal position, can't speak, can't verbally communicate if we normally can verbally communicate. All communication is shut down because the body is just going, there's some problems here. We're just going to shut everything down for a little while, and we'll wait till it all is better.
It's like conserving energy.
And so, and the meltdown is flight and fight.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many words in my head. I'm just trying to make sure I don't make a silly mistake. And the shutdown is the freeze in the reptilian response.
I would argue it is also flight. It's like an internal flight. For me, I have a tendency to dissociate a little bit, which it's like if I can't actually physically escape a situation, I can mentally escape.
I suppose I was describing it. I was looking at it from an external perspective, and also, actually an external perspective. But that is a good point. You're trying to run away from what is causing us the harm. Burnout for me is a longer term, and longer term could be days, or could be weeks, or could be months, or could be years of lack of. There's so much masking going on. There's so much trauma involved with our experience that our body is just slowly shutting down until you're at this like ground zero. So I don't think you normally see it as you don't see it as a meltdown or a shutdown. Very often it's after the fact.
And it's that can sort of be a trigger for it, but it's been building for a while. To me, a burnout is like chronic toxic stress without a reprieve, and then it leads to shutting down a lot of the abilities you would normally have. Like your executive functioning can be terrible for the next year. Your like the things that normally you would feel like you could do, you can't do anymore. You can't mask anymore. I know that when I'm burnt out, it's like I do not have excess energy for anything. Everything just has such a heavy cost of spoons. Going back to spoon theory, I'm more flustered. The things that I'm normally good at doing, my memory doesn't work as well. It's chronic toxic stress, and the process of getting back to not being as toxically stressed takes a really long time, undoing a lot of damage to your nervous system, to everything.
And the last letter in this four-letter acronym, the Inertia, this is one I haven't knowingly interacted. I'm not sure I've ever been in an inertia state, though that's just may mean I need to dig a bit longer. So I'm going to let you describe the inertia.
And it's possible you might not, because like I think we've talked about, you don't really have ADHD, or you don't suspect that you have ADHD. And I think many ADHDers relate to inertia. It's the idea of getting stuck, unable to move or activate to do something, even something you really want to do. So you could be like, I want to get out of bed and, do my favorite activity, but then somehow not being able to activate. And like this could be a task, like I can't do the work, even though I know I need to do it. So it's like a momentary freeze related to one particular trigger usually. Whereas like a shutdown is everything. You freeze about everything and remain frozen for longer. It's not one stimulus response, That's how I see it.
And that's really good. And in fact, you have raised a really important point for me, is that even though, and you and I have talked about this a lot, and I am very much a proponent that autism and ADHD are the same thing. It's a bigger expansion, and our presentations, it's a difference. It's a single type of difference with just different strengths of
different presentations, which makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
However, I because I don't have so many ADHD presentations, it's funny. The minute you talked about what your description, I suddenly thought, oh, hang on a minute. I live with 3 ADHD people. I know exactly what that is. And I just didn't think about it from an autistic perspective. So I apologize for any ADHD people. ADHDers. That didn't like consciously came to my head, because that's my example straight away for that is my son, who we always tell their teachers, don't give them too many choices.
Mm-hmm.
They will just stop. If you give them 3 essay topics, they will think about all 3 and then go back and go back and back and then go, I can't work out, and just stop. Yeah. Even though they're capable of answering each of the topics. My wife also to that extent as well. She'll think about plan A, plan B, plan A, plan B, plan A, plan B. And then very often she'll go, what's the solution? Like ask me to make a decision, because she can't.
Yeah. Oh, I'm like that.
That's so everything. That's the inertia aspect. Okay. And I
well, and it's especially frustrating. It's frustrating because we often want to do the things. Like there were many times over the summer where I wished I was doing more on my book, and I couldn't do anything else except be like, why can't I start on my book? Why can't I do anything? Like, it happens. So yeah, you have to learn kind of strategies for activating when your limbic brakes are kicking in and you're not having the response you want to have. You're not getting the dopamine rush that helps you get to that stage. You don't absorb enough dopamine from doing the things that make it more likely you're going to feel like, oh, this will be rewarding to do again in the future. So all of those systems are kind of working against you. So those are the four things we're going to be talking about today.
So we've as usual with us, we've tangent to the end of the conversation, and we've said it at the start. I had approached today with the idea that I was an offshoot of something else. And I was wondering whether the inertia is an autistic trait, or is it a consequence of a meltdown, a shutdown, or a breakdown? And now I'm going to toss that question to you.
I think it is more likely to lead to one of those things. I feel like when you have enough inertia, you feel like nothing in my life is going right. This is just another thing that I can't get done. And it does activate your nervous system, and it can lead to burnout or shutdown, meltdown or shutdown. And if you have enough of all of those things over time, it can definitely
you'll go into a burnout. Yeah. I love the fact that we've brought the ADHD aspect to it, because the more I think about that, the more I see that being it's an independent process. It's not inertia. The inertia that I see in my family and how you've described it is not because of a meltdown or a shutdown. It's a separate thing, which, as you say, interacts. Okay, that's cool.
Another sort of aspect of experiencing that kind of inertia, I think, comes down to the fact that as autistic people, and I would wager other neurodivergent people too, but there is research that autistic people internalize things they do wrong as shame rather than guilt. So they tend to go, I'm a bad person that I made this mistake, or I couldn't get this thing done, rather than, oh, I made a mistake. Oh, I did one thing wrong. Oops. So we sort of internalize a self-concept, or a concept of ourselves as learners, or as partners, or as whatever the hat is we're supposed to be wearing, where we feel like, we've completely dropped the ball. We internalize something negative about ourselves in this context.
Yeah, that never happens to me. It's a that is very much my experience, and it's something that I'm even ashamed to talk about, because it makes me, I should be better than this. I should do, and even in me describing it, I think exactly what you're saying. A couple of times this week, I felt I'm a bad advocate because I made a mistake or didn't respond in the right way. And not the fact that I did 99 great things and one ended up being like minor. All I'm thinking of is that minor aspect, which makes, that's.
That goes back to the triune brain, that red brain component. When we're in red brain, we our threat detection signals are like our systems are working on overdrive. We're picking up all the negatives way more than anything positive, which reinforces the state of alert that we're in. So you're like, this mistake, your internal alarm is going off, and you're not noticing all the other great work that you've done in the week. Yeah.
It's that I never thought I needed external validation, and certainly
we talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I look. I'm ego the size of the planet, to lovely paraphrase Douglas Adams. And when it comes to like music aspects, I really honestly don't care how somebody reacts to my music, because I like it, and I've had enough history that lots of people have liked what I've done in a whole bunch of different ways. So an individual response, it hurts if it's my wife, but basically I finally don't care unless I'm working, doing something for someone specific. But it's funny how that doesn't transfer to other parts of my life.
Yeah, it's like your self-concept related to music has developed in such a confident way because you've had success, because you've done so many things, because you have such expertise, you maybe don't need the validation there, but in other things. And I relate to that too. I know I'm an excellent teacher. That's not something that I feel nervous about. I'm being evaluated this year. Every 5 years in Ontario, teachers are evaluated, and I'm not nervous at all. I'm like, come anytime. I don't even have to plan which lesson. Like, just show up. I'm happy. Like, we don't have to make it a big production, because I'm very confident in that. But I mean, I've texted you many times with like, imposter syndrome. What do you think about this? Like, about almost everything else in life.
Now, boy, have we gone on a different tangent. The imposter syndrome. I deal with that a lot with other people. I probably do it myself as well, but I'm maybe a little less aware of it. A lot of reading I've done on imposter syndrome blames society. In other words, it's how society has been teaching us to react, or what society's expecting, that makes us feel like we're imposters. Now, I wonder if there's a little more going on. What do you think?
I'm sure there's more going on, but definitely it ties to expectations and perception. Going back to perception, that's the worry, is how will other people perceive me in this thing? Are they going to see me as, bringing some sort of value to this role? I know that what I'm talking about. I know what I'm doing, or not. And often we feel it when we're starting a new role, when we're venturing into something that is new to us. The first time I taught at the university, so I'd already earned my PhD, but I was coming in to teach adults, and I taught children and teens for like over a decade, you know what I mean? And I was so nervous. I thought I was going to be sick, Bruce. My stomach hurt. I was sweating. Like, it was like, my heart was palpitating. It was the worst. I got through the first class, and after that I felt a lot better. But that first class, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I was just so nervous to teach adults. And now I love it. It's one of my favorite things to do. And it's even more bizarre because I had been teaching adults, because every year I mentor about 20 different teachers. I do professional development in services. Like, why was I so nervous to teach some 25-year-olds? I don't know, but I was. I was like,
yeah. I cannot imagine that, because I don't have those barriers about teaching age groups.
Mhm.
I know. I suppose it's like if I had to teach in German or French, languages that I, sort of understand, sort of can read, but yeah, sort of. Okay, now I'm sweating a little bit and tingling. Yeah. So going back to the imposter stuff, is it a core part of our perception, or is it the trauma?
well, I mean, I feel like so many people experience imposter syndrome. It probably relates more to neoliberalism, because we live in a world where we're raised to think we have to compete with people. We're raised to think that only a select few rise to the top. And so I think that does make us think comparatively about ourselves versus others. Do I know enough? Are they going to think I know enough? Or like, how am I being perceived in this scenario? Is because we're always under a microscope in our ruggedly individualistic society.
And I think now I'm thinking about from your response, it's again about us not
feeling like we measure up.
Well, actually, I was more going to say everybody. I think you raised a good point. Everybody has imposter syndrome. Everybody is challenged. Everybody is told they're not good enough. Everyone is told they've got to do better all the time. I think neurodivergent people, because we are still having to put the social rules together, and that we don't inherently understand them, means it takes us longer to get over it.
I would say potentially we might feel imposter syndrome in more scenarios as well.
Yeah.
Like I've had to put, I used to have the sense of, okay, social Kara is coming out. I'm going to this party. I'm only going to stay for an hour because I don't really want to stay, but I will make myself stay for an hour. Put on your social role, and like hopefully no one sees how unsocial you are and how badly you don't want to be there. And so even that had a bit of imposter syndrome. Like, is someone going to find out I'm not actually cool? I'm not actually funny. I'm not actually like I'm not part of the group.
Which is, I mean, it's amusing to me because I'm a really good friend of yours, and you're ridiculously interesting, and you are really funny, and you don't have to try for me, and so therefore it's like, well, yeah, if you didn't try, maybe that aspect would have been easier. But of course, it's still that us having to mask and create this little character for ourselves in this for this short period. We're probably going to have to do a very long talk about masking at some stage, and the unmasking that we need to go through as adults. I've tried to say that. Yeah, I've tried to say that part of the adult diagnostic process, at the discovery process, is being really aware when you're masking. And I think earlier in my career, I would have said that masking is not important, but I think I'm recognizing there are times where you do need to mask. And so it's going through that process you just described about going to a party. In fact, that's a good example. Like, as adults, socialization is really important. Making social connections is really important. It's a human thing. It's important. The way it's often presented to us makes it difficult. So we do need to learn to get through for a short period of time. We do need to go to a social gathering, and we need to prepare it, and we need to make sure, you need to be thinking about this, and hopefully going with people who understand our differences, to make the social connections, and then to have the time to recover from those things. That's certainly a place where, from an adult perspective, it's really super important to mask. I think I had a great thought just then. It's us being in control of the masking.
Yes, and yeah, us being in control, us also allowing ourselves certain accommodations, like, being able to take a break, being able to leave, go for a walk, come back if we want, doing things that make ourselves feel comfortable and not pushing ourselves too much. And sort of like, you enjoy it so much more when you have an out, when okay, I can go sit in my car for a few minutes, which I did, I think it was 2 summers ago. For the first time, I was at a social event, and I was completely overwhelmed, and it was a boiling hot day, and the whole thing was outside, and I didn't know most of the people, and there was music going, and it was it was too much. And I went and sat in my car for 20 minutes. And I didn't make apologies. I just did it. And I felt so much better. And when I came back, I was like, okay, I feel more at ease. I feel like I can have conversations again. Because there comes a point where it's like, I'm no longer processing. If someone's talking to me and I'm just like, I'm dissociating in my head. I just don't want to be there. Awful.
We're going to say it's normalization of our experiences to the world. Again, it's one of, and again, we are going to be talking about this later in reference to this article, but it's like our skills are useful for other humans, as you beautifully described it. Like the fact that you and I have talked independently about this, so this idea independently about going to social functions and just leaving and then coming back as being a normal part of the routine. I bet every single person in the world wants to have that permission to be in a situation and to be just sort of leaving for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, walking in a park, whatever, and then coming back. Actually, maybe that's what people used to smoke for.
You know what? I would not be surprised. I had a family member who smoked for a very, very long time. And I remember them saying that they took up smoking because they didn't know what to do with their hands. You know, it gave them certain confidence, I guess. And there you go, right?
Somebody very, 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 very close to me used to indulge in that as well. And when she was trying to finally quit, it was the physical aspect was one of the hardest things. That's super interesting. Yeah. Now, should we roll into personal experiences of almost meltdowns and shutdowns, or did you have something else?
But before we do, I just wanted to say one thought that I had. When I was going through my diagnostic process, you know, you engage in a lot of storytelling with your diagnostician. And she helped me to realize that one thing that I have been doing, like when I've had friends over for board games, for instance, often it's like hours long, like 4 or 5 hours, like it's a really long time. And I have almost always gone to like check on the cat or take like an extra bathroom break that I don't need. But I'm like, I go and I cuddle the cats for a few minutes, and it was always under the auspices of, I just want to see how the cats are. No, it was a self-regulatory thing for me to get out of the situation. I needed the sensory break with my cat, which is now a very deliberate strategy that I use all the time, as you know.
And I know perfectly well. Actually, maybe you don't see this so much because of the difference in your students, the age of your students, but it's a well-known. I've heard this from many, 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 many high school students that they'll use bathroom breaks and extensive bathroom breaks to self-regulate or to get out of a situation that's uncomfortable. And I'm not too sure that happens at maybe elementary and middle school. I mean, you have kids who are nervous and like that, I need to pee because that's what happens when you get nervous. I mean, that I understand. But this is actually people consciously like using the bathroom as a...
I did. I certainly did in middle school and high school. And I definitely know of students who have avoided recess by going to the bathroom, things like that. Again, it's putting off more anxious scenarios, right?
Yeah. Two examples are just coming to my head, which is like what's wrong with the system. Your example just then, like we should never have a student in such a nervous state that they're going to the bathroom to get out of recess. So it's like, what's happening at recess? That there's something wrong with the structure. That is just wrong. I've been very careful with this story because it's somebody current, not in my family, but this person was describing their experience at school, and they have a learning disability or they just don't like reading aloud. Let's just say they just don't like it. Forget about the learning disability. They told me that every time they had to read at school, they would go to the bathroom until their time was up.
Wow. A lot of
every single time. And it's like, okay, how can a teacher allow this to happen without some sort of remediation. In other words, every time I ask this person to read, they disappear. And I've noticed this 3 times. Okay, good. So there's a problem here. Why do we make people read aloud?
And it's so stressful. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, like, why not? There's got to be a way to have, especially in elementary school, to have stations where you can rotate students and they can read privately to you. You know what I mean? So you can see how their reading is. But it's such a mortifying experience. I think very few people enjoy it. As someone who was a great reader, I enjoyed reading to some extent in front of people because I always had, that performer aspect to me. But I didn't like hearing other people read. Like, I just found it was a very cumbersome task, and I would be like 2 chapters, 3 chapters on, because it was boring to me. So anyway, I didn't have self-esteem issues, but for so many people, it is a very deeply traumatic experience.
And so, why do we continue to make people do it? Why do we have a student going to the bathroom to get out of recess? Why do we have a student going to the bathroom to get a public? It's just the stress.
Yeah, allow students everywhere experience dread and associate that with school. And I would say probably like 75% of people's experiences is like that. And anyway, that's a whole other topic, whole other episode to do. Let me add that to the list. Let's get back to Burnout, Shutdown, Meltdown.
And that's about our time for this evening. Thank you so much for listening to us not talk about our subject. So, okay. And maybe we'll have a part 2 of this in a week or 2. If I may, I would like to share all these tumbling thoughts of what happened to me last week. And I just hope that by sharing this, it's going to prompt other people to share their experience. It's going to prompt people to think about what's going on and not be self-critical at all. And in fact, I have no, although as I said, I have a problem with the only seeing negative aspects of certain things. I don't feel bad about what happened last week, other than one thing, and I'll talk about that right at the end if I remember. Maybe I should. Kara's using the chat to remind herself, and maybe I had an iPad last time I was running notes. So here's basically kind of what happened, and it's important for the context. This is why I'm saying this was close to a burnout rather than a shutdown, because shutdowns for me tend to be a lot quicker. In other words, they take place within minutes or a small number of hours. So I had a not relaxing week the week before. If I don't sleep properly, that's a lack of sleep is a big problem for me, and I use various methods to make sure I sleep well, and a lot of the time I do pretty well. But it can, if something happens, or if I get 2 days where I don't get enough sleep, I am in a heightened sense. It's not a pleasant situation for me. Everything is heightened. There was probably some stresses at work. There was probably some stresses in the family. And honestly, none of these were special or excessive, but just regular stresses that we all go through. But I think because of my lack of sleep, and being autistic, things started to not feel, I could feel on myself things were not right. And I am I'm somatically very aware because it's how I approach performance. And when I used to do sports and all those sort of things, I am really aware of what my body should feel like, which can cause problems. Anyway, on Saturday, I had a performance, and people who are new to me or have just been listening to the podcast, I talk about music a lot, but the truth is, about 18 months ago, I decided to change careers and work as an autistic advocate, and I kind of stopped playing. And in fact, since I moved to our new place of residence in Vancouver, I had stopped doing music, performing 100%. I still wrote, but it was 45 years of as being a musician kind of stopped, and I was sort of comfortable with it. So I thought. Then this year, earlier this year, I was invited to play in a big band through a contact at my son's school. And then I got asked to join this orchestra. And it's like, these are amateur productions, and it's like there's no stress. And I've really quite enjoyed being back for a little while. So just last Saturday was our first public performance for this orchestra. A couple of things started to go wrong. We were the concert master, the first violin player, and myself and the president, who plays bass, were asked to do a short little performance to advertise what was going to happen on the afternoon, in the evening, in this place. And we said, yeah, sure. And we were told 5 minutes. So the night before, we were told it was going to be an hour. Now, again, I've been doing this for 45 years. Somebody telling me as I'm walking on stage that they're going to change the music or change the piece does not worry me in my previous life. It honestly didn't. And it's one of I did a lot of performing in situations where that was expected. Really didn't worry me. It worried the other players, and we had to sort of come up with some new ideas and things. Anyway, so we were playing, but we were playing in this extraordinarily noisy small room. There were lots of people, and the people were trying to talk louder and louder and louder to be over the background music, and that is never a wonderful feeling. It was a little hot. There was just all these little things, and I started not to feel very comfortable about it. Sorry, my cat is trying to remind me it's almost dinner time. So that the afternoon was a little stressful, but it was okay. It was okay. And then I found out that our performance was going to be outside in the wind. And I don't like that at all, because I play piano, I have to hold the music with one hand and playing with the other. Again, it was a little warm. The weather was not great. The sound we had a sound system and I couldn't hear the violins properly. And 3/4 through the concert, I looked down and there's blood on the keyboard. Now, ow. I am a daisy. I am a daisy. My body gets scratches and bruises easily because I have proprioception problems. I knock into things. Hey, did I tell anybody I was autistic? Oh, yeah. So what had happened was, and it's happened to me several times, that you just you're playing, you don't get enough oral feedback, and so you probably play a little too hard. And all my cuticles were bleeding in my fingers. And again, this has happened before. However, suddenly, like, there's blood on the keyboard. I didn't know it had happened.
Oh my goodness. So
blood equals pain. Like, blood equals pain. You don't bleed unless there's a pain. Now, it could be a minor pain, but yeah, I didn't know this had happened. but not that I pushed through. I was just zero aware because I was hyper focused on my safe space. So quickly, I'm cleaning the keyboard while still trying to play. And fortunately, we were like the second last piece, and then and I didn't play the last piece because my fingers suddenly it was then uncomfortable, and I recognized the pain. Like became aware, and I was like, you know what? I'm a piano player in an orchestra. No one's really going to care if I don't play at this point. So I didn't. So these a whole bunch of series of these little things
added up.
Happen. Two things I know now. One, there was no downtime. I went straight from getting ready, setting up for the small little pre-gig. I came home for maybe an hour and a half, but in that hour and a half, I had to make sure that I had all my orchestra music in order. I had to put a different set of clothes on. You know, it was just there wasn't any relaxing. Went straight into the concert. The concert went on a little late. I got home. You know, I'd probably been 6 or 7 hours actively on. Now, one, no break. Good. Two, this is something I've done over and over again. And that active part of my brain is going, you can handle this because you've done this before.
Yeah.
So there's something that I learned very, very strongly is that my past experiences can really interfere with what's going on in the present because my brain is going, you've done this before. You can handle this. Dangerous. Yeah. So that night, didn't sleep again, woke up on Sunday, and things were just wrong. I could not, I said before, like on Monday at work, I was struggling with communication. On Sunday, I didn't speak at all or spoke very, very slowly and maybe 1 or 2 sentences during the day. So speech, definitely. And speech is not something, speech is something I don't have a problem with usually. I have problems with oral speech recognition, but not speech production. Temperature regulation was just out the window. It was like 20 degrees, like incredibly average day in the purest sense of the word for a human being. 21 point something is supposed to be the optimal temperature for a human being. I was wearing a light shirt and sweating, and then shivering, and then sweating. I could not regulate temperature. So I was super aware that I couldn't regulate temperature. And the active brain's going, that's funny. You can't regulate temperature. That means something's going wrong. You've got some sensory issues. What else is going on? That's right. You haven't spoken. Speaking is really hard. And your oral processing is right in the tubes. That's what's going in my head. What didn't come in my head is, this is how we're going to fix it.
Yes. Interesting.
However, then, like the body aspect, I was exhausted. Like, I knew I wasn't physically exhausted, but mentally exhausted, which meant basically I spent the whole day in bed, little interaction, whatever. I still had to drive. I had to drive to get my wife from work, and she works. It's 5 minutes drive away, if it's that. It's very, very close. And conscious brain was going, is this safe?
Mm-hmm.
I remember having a discussion in my head. Is this safe? And it probably wasn't 100% safe, but I think it was 90% safe.
Yeah.
So again, it's like, it's like one part of the active prefrontal's going, is this safe? Yes, it is. Now let's just think about all that sort of stuff. Another part of some sort of executive functions going, that's interesting. You're having this discussion with yourself. This is not good. But so Sunday was pretty rough. Like, and evidently my family knew something was going on, but nobody knew what was going on. And we've discussed, I've had a couple of times where I've gone into shutdown. One time active shutdown, and a couple of times getting close. And after the fact, I've talked to the family, and said, for me, I appreciate the check-in, but there's nothing really you can do other than it's going to take a little bit of time to recover. And if it's taking 3 or 4 hours, just make sure give me some food or give me a drink or something. Like, kind of, I just need to be kind of left alone, but I also appreciate the contact. But it was confusing for the family because I think it was manifesting in a different way. I then went to work on the Monday, and I was feeling actually actively cognitively feeling pretty good. We had a couple of interesting things happen, and I knew the process, I knew the answer, I knew what should happen. Communicating that was difficult. And I said to my manager that a couple of days later that I was aware I was struggling, but I also knew I kind of was in control of the balance, and I was checking in with myself to know if I was safe and could do what I needed to do, and I was kind of okay. And by Tuesday, things were much better. However, I have noticed that I've probably been pushing myself a little bit the last couple of days, and for instance, we're recording this on Sunday, not Thursday. And I think me trying to do this on Thursday would have been problematic. Yeah.
Well, and I'm glad that you asked for that. I'm glad that you asked for more time, because we have to do what we can to restore after these moments. Yeah, and I texted you. We have this like connection sometimes, and you're in the throes of burnout, and I texted you a question. I said, "Is autistic burnout caused by how we are conditioned to not listen to our bodies, reducing our somatic awareness, a kind of trauma-induced alexithymia? We push well past our limits repeatedly until we crash hard." And you were like, "It's not a good question for today." But that's something I think about, because I'm getting better with the somatic awareness, because that's the bulk of the work that I do in therapy is tuning into my own needs, wants, feelings, and what does that feel like in the body. Because I have pushed through many very uncomfortable situations, not recognizing my discomfort, or mistaking discomfort, mistaking fear for excitement, or whatever it is, right? Like, and I like, so what causes what, yeah. So that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, is the burnout because we don't listen to our bodies? Is it because we don't recognize our feelings along the way, because of how these experiences compounded and we're taught to just push through?
Now, I can answer some of that. I can answer that question where I wasn't in a great space for. There is there's a good autistic advocate in England, whose name's just escaped me.
Kieran Rose?
Kieran Rose, thank you.
I don't know how I knew that.
Okay, listeners, we didn't plan this. That was very much Kara reading my mind. Kieran Rose talks about how a lot of the autistic presentations are trauma. In fact, he says everything's trauma based, and I'm not. I mean, I don't 100% disagree. I don't 100% agree. But that's an interesting response. An interesting like lambda place to start. Yes, burnout is trauma based. Like again, it's like everything is perception and everything's political. Like yes, everything is trauma based. What that means is a little more difficult because my experience of what I went through, I don't think could be described as traumatic. Perhaps if you wanted to push the definition, there were little elements of trauma.
They say there are big T and little t traumas. So big T traumas are like very obvious. This would probably traumatize anyone. War, abuse, like big things. And little traumas can stack up, and they can be things that are small because traumas, again, it's perception. It's how does this particular instance impact you? A teacher embarrassing you in class. Someone else might be able to shrug it off. Someone else, it's like this now becomes a gigantic fear that I have in all interactions going forward. So little t traumas can stack. They're called adverse childhood experiences.
And that would be something I would really need to think about a lot, about whether last weekend was a series of little T's. The only thing that's, well, actually, no. I think at the moment I'm going to say it was sensory overwhelm, but with the overarching tiredness and slightly stressful week earlier just made that compounded. So, that's a little bit trauma. Now, the thing about when you're talking about somatic body, I because I did do professional soccer and I'm a musician, there's a lot of self-work I've done about what the body should feel like when something's happening. So I'm really picky if I'm playing a piano that's not got a great action, because I'm not getting the biofeedback that I need to know how much pressure I should be using. But I can get around that because I know what it should feel like. If I want a mezzo piano, it should be that. I can feel the muscles in I know kind of what it feels like. And if it's not bouncing back, I can shift it because the piano is not reacting the same way. You can, kick a soccer ball at me at different angles with different levels of curve, and my mind is working out the physics. I know kind of where to put my leg up to stop the ball and cushion it as it hits so the ball will drop. Like all these things I'm super well trained in and being super aware. I think the problem from an autistic perspective is that when my body doesn't do what I expect it, that is overwhelmingly bad. Overwhelmingly bad. And in fact, I had a huge breakdown 22 years ago because I had an injury at a workplace, and my brain would not allow my body to get better at the rate it was doing. My brain wanted it to happen faster, and that caused the breakdown.
Wow.
Yeah. It actually was in covering up a whole bunch of other traumas going on. And this is well before my autistic discovery, but the doctor, and I had a family physician who was working with me, said it was like super obvious that I wasn't just giving my body permission. that I was actively, actively telling the body, I know how the body should feel, and you're not doing the right thing, and this is really bad. It's like that's a horrible thing for a mind-body duality to be doing.
Yeah.
So did that cause burnout? Back then, definitely, with other past traumas and traumas of what was going on in my life at the time exploding. That was a terrible burnout. The only good thing is I got a payout from work, which gave me enough money to emigrate.
Oh, good. And that got you here.
It's the reason. Yeah, it's the reason I could come to Canada. Is that I was injured in a workplace, and it took so long, and it was the workplace's fault to a greater or lesser extent. So I got a payout, which allowed me to emigrate. Like, weirdest reason.
Wow.
So what's your questions?
I guess I'm just thinking about burnout and meltdown and shutdown in general, and my experiences of them too. I think shutdown is my default. It's like I experience that more often. I do feel like I'm close to burnout. I'm trying to be more mindful about managing my energy, restoring, because I can feel the cumulative effect of stress over time on me. And part of that is, again, I push through all the time. I use adrenaline all the time to get stuff done. Like, that saying, if you want something done, ask a busy person. It's the only way I can get things done is if I have too much to do. But then that leaves me like my energy is always like this, and my heart rate is always like this, and I'm breathing more shallowly. I can feel these changes happening. So I visualize burnout kind of like a piece of candy corn. It's like the 3-layered candy. It's sort of a triangular. There's like orange, yellow, and white. And
I bought some for my daughter today. Because you described it to me you described me the candy corn, and I was like, oh yeah, and I really didn't know, and then I saw it today. So yes, I do know what that looks like.
I sort of visualize like 3 layers on the triangle, and here's the bottom layer is like, this is healthy coping capacity, healthy stress management. Then there's like the warning signs, which can lead to the burnout, right? So I feel like I'm often in the warning sign zone, and I can either go to burnout. And on the recovery, on the other side down, like you still pass through the unhealthy. Like that's where you're recovering from the burnout. And you can very easily go back to the pinnacle, the burnout, or the moment that is like the trigger point. And I had a significant burnout, which was like a shutdown. It was like, I think it was about 4-day shutdown, where I couldn't really speak. I couldn't put words together. I was just crying, or nothing, which is even scarier in a way, where it's like, I can't even cry anymore. I can't think anymore. Like the absence of thought, or the thoughts become very fatalistic, right? Like, and I'm not someone who's ever had active, maybe I won't say ever, but I don't have active suicidal ideation. But in a moment like that, you have thoughts, or I have thoughts that are like, I don't want to experience this anymore. I don't want to be here. I don't have the energy or the drive or the will to actually do anything, but things are so chaotic and unpredictable that I'm unable to cope in this moment, is really what my brain is saying with whatever words it uses. And yeah, so I had that 4-day where I couldn't say that. I couldn't see a way out of it. I could just feel. It's basically like an overwhelming feeling without the rational thought, without the blue brain to temper me or to help me see how to get out of bed, how to either stop crying or be able to do anything. And yeah, again, the loss of speech. And I will have the loss of speech in like often in conflict situations. I can't speak. Anyone that I date, I typically let them know, like, I need time to process things. Like, if there is a conflict, I might need space, and then I will come back and have the conversation when I'm ready. Like, it's not me avoiding, it's just I cannot get my thoughts together. They disappear. I can only feel, and then there are no concepts attached to that, so I can't formulate. I can't tell you what I want. I can't tell you what I can't even label the feeling. It's entirely overwhelming. And so I can shut down in those situations as well. And I can give you a more specific example. So this is someone I was previously dating. And, it seemed pretty good at first, like things sometimes look great. The whole point of dating is the discernment process. Is this like someone you can tolerate? Is this someone you really like or not?
Okay.
Whatever.
Sure.
Are you a good fit? And I let this person know like what my processing needs were. Yeah.
My cat's opened the back door.
Okay. All right. And we're back. So where was I? I was telling a dating discernment story. So when I'm dating someone, like I let them know that sometimes it can take me some time to process, especially in a conflict situation, to know my own feelings. Like I'm so in tune with other people's feelings that I will often be overwhelmed by their feelings. And it'll take me a couple of days before I realize how I feel about a situation. It's really terrible not to be able to process quickly in the moment. It's difficult. Anyway, I had started dating this person, and I think things were great, very great, intelligent conversations, loved it. And then I happened to notice that when they were washing dishes, they didn't use dish soap. And I was like, I don't even know how it came out, but I was like, you don't use dish soap? And my face must have been like horrified. And they became very angry with me. I tried to like cover up because I didn't want them to feel badly. Like I was sort of like, oh, I'm a bit of a germaphobe, and I like left the situation. I went to a different room.
Check on the cats.
Check on cats, and they trailed after me and was like, "Why does that upset you? Why are you so upset by that?" And I was so confounded. Like they started to be like, what's your problem? Why are you such a germaphobe? Like me having hygiene standards was the problem. And I didn't even know how to formulate, like how to explain it. And I just said, like, I said, it's fine. I need time to respond. Like, I don't want to talk about this right now. It's fine. Can't we go on with our day? And they kept badgering me with questions and being like, well, why do you think that's a big deal? Well, why is that such a problem for you? I don't think it's a problem for other people. Blah, 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 blah. Like all of this barrage of questions. And I just said, like, I was getting overwhelmed and I was losing the ability to speak. And it just felt, it was so overwhelming to have this huge disconnect with a person over something that like I sort of take, I assume 90% of the people, probably 99% of people who can afford dish soap and have access to dish soap, use dish soap to wash dishes, because like germs and like and then I'm also like having this, all of these images in my head of like, what dishes have I used in this house? And like, how many times have I used a fork? And was that, whose mouth, you know what I mean? Like, and just the fact that I had said, like, please, if you want to talk about this, we can talk about it later, but I need processing time. They're like, is this a deal breaker for you? And it was like, no, but you harassing me with questions kind of is, although I didn't say that, but later I kind of came to that realization, because in the moment, again, I just sort of freeze, this intense freeze reaction and inability to express how I'm feeling. But in retrospect, I was like, my heart was racing. I felt threatened. I felt physically threatened by a line of questioning when I had already said, please, I cannot talk about this right now. Please, I need space to process. Like, if you want to have an argument, we can do that, but I need time to think about how I feel about this, because I don't know right now how I feel about this. And he was like, I felt so judged. And I couldn't tell him I didn't judge, because in dating, you judge. You know, in dating, when you're first early dating, you're judging if this is a person you're compatible with or not. And like, sorry, you felt judged when my face betrayed that I was surprised that you didn't use dish soap. But I tried to like be polite and be like, oh, it's all on me, you know? And it was like several hours before I could get out of the situation. And the person was like making me feel badly and making it sound like I was completely in, like, nobody else cares about hygiene. And yeah, it took me, I don't know how many days to really like analyze that experience and be like, how do I now feel about this person? And it wasn't even about the dish soap. It was more about the fact that I had asked for space. I had asked for time. I said, yeah, we can talk about this. Can we talk about it later? Like, and that was not respected at all. And I went into like a shutdown mode. I completely dissociated. Like, yeah. So, and even thinking about it now, like I can feel my body getting really tense. I can feel like I want to cry. Like there's like, it's like I can't speak. There's something in my throat. That all comes into my body again. So yeah, that's just one example of many times I've experienced shutdown to different degrees. So I told you an extreme version, and then that's sort of like a very common version for me, is an interpersonal shutdown and not being able to articulate how I feel in order to advocate or to explain why something is upsetting me. I lose the words. I can't do it. I have had meltdowns, but not often.
Yeah. I kind of imagine you having a meltdown.
Slapping and crying and like just like high energy and just lots of crying.
I can't imagine you having a meltdown because I've been part of shutdowns with you. And so it's like, it's
uncommon. Like I can think of 2 in the last maybe decade. And one was actually on the subway. This was interesting because this was before I knew I was autistic. And I was going to give a talk somewhere. And I always try to be like half an hour early for things. And so I was like, I left with time to be an hour early. And I'm on the subway and underground, it stalls. It stalls. We're in the black tunnel. And it has a really terrible announcement where you can't make out the voice, but they're like, you get like every 3 words about there being a disruption and they don't know when it's going to be working again. And it was an hour and you don't know how long you're going to be stuck. And I would say the first 20 minutes I coped pretty well. There weren't a lot of people around, like there was someone way down at the other end. But I would say by about the half hour mark, I was like, not just like the gentle rocking I normally do. I was like full on, like going down and like my face almost between my knees. And I remember when I finally so I was late to the presentation I was supposed to give, which was terrible. We're walking in like late to that, which also gave me huge anxiety. I don't even know how I got through the presentation. But I remember thinking, once I was out of the subway on the walk to the presentation, that probably helped calm me down a little bit. But I was like, I sort of understand what it's like for autistic people. I was like, I was pushed to a point where, well, that's just because I'm autistic. But I was like, it just took me like, 30 minutes to get pushed to that point where and I think I was probably making noises, but like, I don't know, but I would not be surprised. I often make noises and don't realize I'm making noises.
Yeah.
So that was one of the two.
There's a couple of things I want to sort of emphasize or reiterate or you raised a prompt for me. The point that I want to talk about is, although I've had discussions with my family about what to do, I was asked, if this is happening, can you give me some sort of sign in the middle? And I went, no, I can't. And that's, it was, my family's super supportive, but it was still that, why can't you just tell me in the moment when it's happening? Because it's like, okay, that's the last time I can, and she was not saying even like, can you tell me, because I've got app and I could do something. It's like, I said, no, sweet, I that's the one time I can't. All I can do is share what has happened in the past, and this was on Tuesday. This was Tuesday this week, maybe Wednesday. And I was talking about the previous weekend. It's like, all I can tell you is what I was going through. And they were trying to fix. And it's so frustrating for them because they wanted to make sure I was okay. But I couldn't articulate that. And I think autistic people in relationships, which is everybody, because I'm talking about any social relationship, we just need to be open about this sort of stuff and what we think our needs would be, and to share with those intimate friends, intimate relationships we have, what we need.
And
that's quite interesting because it's basically little.
It's little.
There's little you can do.
I have to say, being in a relationship with another autistic person is really beautiful for me. Like, I'm getting teary thinking about it, because when I have had moments where I've been deeply upset, not with him, but with things going on in life that feel overwhelming, he just holds me. He doesn't talk at me until I'm ready to talk. He doesn't give advice until I'm ready for advice and I ask for it. Like, he'll give me empathy. He'll give me like sort of this physical sense of support. Because he knows I can't talk, and he knows I will talk when I'm ready to. And my turnaround
is so yeah. Like, I think, much as I think my relationship is really fantastic, like,
yes,
super fantastic. But we do butt up when her ADHD and my autism clash. Yeah. And it's funny. You talked about your reaction to the no dish soap. We've had small examples of where I can't control my facial. And it's kind of interesting because you texted me. I knew about what was going on with you either when it was happening or just after. I think you texted me really quite quickly. And right now, as you've repeated the story, I'm still horrified at the thought of somebody washing dishes with it. And I'm not a germaphobe. In fact, I'm not a particular. I mean, I'm a kind of clean person, but other people in my life are much cleaner. Like, I care about cleaning as much more than I do. But that thought still is like, what? And so the examples go on. Sorry.
And like the gaslighting, like I'm the only person in the world who would have this concern.
Yeah, I didn't want to say gaslighting, but that's kind of, that's what it is, right?
And I've definitely experienced worse gaslighting with other people, but like, this is just one particular example where I was like, I knew I was shutting down. I knew I had expressed, I'm going to shut down. Like, and it is hard for me talks in heated situations. Like, I know I had put in all the legwork to ask for the support preemptively and didn't get it, right? Which is a good sign. You're not my person too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we do, when we are able to, we can talk about those experiences and what are sort of the general things that help us. The thing of the day had some ideas. So why don't we talk about that? So, because
what a segue.
Just my second great segue. So the article is called "What I Wish You Knew: Insights on Burnout, Inertia, Meltdown, and Shutdown from Autistic Youth." And there are 4 authors: Jasmine Fung, Melanie Penner. It looks like it's French, but the anglicized version would be Clementine Pirlo and Christy Welch. One of the authors is autistic, or one of the researchers is autistic, and they did a study with autistic youth and teens on their experiences of those things: burnout, inertia, meltdown, and shutdown. So they interviewed the 8 children and youth, and it had a lot of findings about how other people can help them as well. So we'll post this in the show notes. But one of the things that I found really interesting about this article was the fact that it talked about how they had studied previously in adults some of these concepts, and autistic adults experience shutdown more than meltdown. But this was not the case with the youth and teens, who all sort of knew what a meltdown was. So they were wondering, is this just because of their maturity level? As they grow older, do autistic individuals learn to manage and avoid a meltdown? And then there was a line that you wanted to talk about. It said, so do they learn to manage or avoid meltdowns either through alternate strategies or through replacing meltdown with shutdown, as shutdowns often have fewer or milder negative consequences compared to meltdowns?
And I disagree with that last part of their statement. And this is why this is a really good article, right? Because I think a lot of the hypotheses they're positing are great and really interesting. I think their problem with this one is that I don't think, certainly what I've experienced and people that I've talked to and the readings that I have, that the actual effect is the same. It's just you don't see, if we're having a shutdown, the external world doesn't see what we're going through. But from my, certainly, I'm going to talk about my personal experience, it's overwhelming both ways. And you cannot say that one is lesser than the other when it comes to reaction to what's going on.
I think there are fewer negative consequences from the outside for shutdown. Like, you're not getting someone yelling at you usually, so it's more like there's less cost to outsiders watching a shutdown than there is if they're watching a meltdown. So yeah. From that perspective, yes, it has fewer consequences. But shutdowns can also be a dangerous thing. Like, they can get you into situations that are dangerous where you freeze and you can't get out of those situations. I'm thinking of, like sexual assault, things like that. Like, shutting down as a coping mechanism is not an actual great coping mechanism. So yeah, I think they're both difficult situations, and you can't always compare challenges, No,
and again, it's pointing out a lack of actually autistic experience in this research, and to give these people, this paper's very specifically credit, they're showing a much broader perspective than I'm used to reading in similar sort of papers. But again, it's still that I'm sure if they did a study on the internal effects, how it affects the actual individual, it's going to be about the same. And in fact, you've written in the notes, and we talked about this a little earlier. I mean, the thing about a shutdown, if you have a shutdown in front of an authority figure, that's possibly worse.
Good point. Really good point.
I'm thinking the worst example, like in a police situation, like if you're violent to the police, they're going to react with some way. And let's say in Canada, it tends to be in a more non-violent way. A non-lethal way, but it's they'll talk about restraint and maybe taser or something. But if you're not responding to the police at all, that's when they're going to go lethal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that's
good point.
Super dangerous. And again, again, sorry for people who don't know me so well. I've been interviewed on media many times on this point, and I have to always state that I do not blame individual police in this situation when they're dealing with an autistic person going through different presentations, because the world is still not used to the way we present. It's tragic.
Mm-hmm.
It's tragic. Yeah.
And that's something I think we'll have another episode on that as a topic too. Other things in the article that we liked, it did talk about, there was one line about how the youth in describing their experiences used metaphor and analogy. So it talked about how, there has been a myth about them not being able to use metaphor or theory of mind, like in older literature, but that this is not the case. So I appreciated that mention. But one of the big things was, as we're talking about, the adults around them didn't understand their burnouts, inertia, shutdown, or meltdown. And so this paper did have a lot of practical ideas, like giving them space to be alone, not forcing eye contact, like those things that make sense to us as autistic people that we need. And I really liked that this paper explored qualitatively what these experiences felt like and what these individual people needed. And we need more research like this.
I did have a quick look at the transcriptions of the people's feelings. It's interesting how much metaphor was being used. And again, it was also interesting how most of the explanation was for external viewing. In other words, this is what it looked like. I was feeling like this is what you would think. This is what you would. I was feeling like this something, and an external viewer would see it as this.
Okay, a lot of perspective taking for somebody else. Yeah. Well,
again, looking at the lack of the articulations that I had about what it felt to me, only to me. Yeah.
Well, and so again, as someone with alexithymia, where it's harder for me to label emotions when I'm in them, analogy and metaphor make so much sense to me. Like if you were to say, find me a meme for how you felt in that experience, I could find you one, no problem. I can find an image that represents something. I can find a song. I just don't always have the word for the complexity of emotions that usually happen in the situations that cause me to shut down or dissociate.
I can't do that so well. Like getting a meme. How describe how you're feeling with a meme. Okay, I can get that. A song is the wrong example for me. Like really wrong, because I'm way too involved in the production and reception of what music is. But it's interesting that I don't think I have this. I have a better level of explaining my emotions than you do. But I also notice, because I live with a highly empathetic woman, that I don't understand I can't articulate the gradations of the emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of interesting. I tell people that I'm not good at social cues other than the obvious ones. And I think I'm reflecting the fact that I can articulate obvious emotions, but maybe not the nuances of them.
Yep. And I believe there's research on that. At least I think it's with children, and it's easier to identify the big 6 main emotions. Anger, sadness, happiness. They're like the primary colors, right? But yeah, the nuances are harder to label, for sure. Yeah. And I can label them really well in other people, but again, that's because I think I've always been a writer, I've always been a reader, but myself, it's harder. All right, well, this has been a really wonderful conversation, and I wrote down like 4 or 5 other episode ideas, so we should probably wrap it up here before our audience shuts down.
Look at us.
Clever.
We can be funny.
Well, thanks so much, Bruce. I loved diving into these topics with you.
Thank you. And thank you for listening to what is a personal well, I'm more than happy. I share basically all my personal life with you, but also for the platform. And listeners, viewers, people in Mars, please share these stories. It's super
our experience.
Yeah, it's super important for our voices, our authentic voices, to be heard. And even if you only tell one other person, the more we talk to all those one other people, the more that what I went through last week and what Kara has talked about in the past, what she's experienced in the past, it's like using the same words again, it normalizes the people's perceptions. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.